The truth has a strange way of arriving at the exact moment people believe their new beginning has finally erased the past. The ballroom inside the historic Grand Wellington Hotel glowed beneath towering crystal chandeliers as hundreds of guests gathered to witness what newspapers had already called the wedding of the year. White roses stretched from the entrance to the grand stage, a live orchestra filled the room with elegant music, and every seat was occupied by business leaders, celebrities, politicians, and close friends who had come to celebrate billionaire Benjamin Hayes as he prepared to marry Sabrina Collins. Television cameras quietly captured every smile while photographers competed for the perfect angle. Everything appeared flawless. Everything looked carefully planned. After years of heartbreak and disappointment, Benjamin finally believed life was giving him another chance. 5 years had passed since the painful divorce that had ended his first marriage. He had convinced himself that chapter belonged to another lifetime. Friends often whispered that fate had finally rewarded him with someone who could help him build the family he had always dreamed about. Sabrina stood only a few feet away in a breathtaking white wedding gown, smiling confidently as guests admired the couple waiting to exchange their vows. Benjamin adjusted his black tuxedo and glanced across the crowd, grateful to see his parents sitting proudly in the front row. His father, Michael Hayes, offered a quiet nod of approval while his mother gently wiped away an emotional tear. Everything had led to this moment. The officiant smiled warmly before asking everyone to stand. The orchestra softened into silence. Benjamin reached for Sabrina's hand. Just as the officiant began speaking, the enormous wooden doors at the back of the ballroom slowly opened. The sound echoed through the silent room. Every head turned toward the entrance. A woman stood there wearing a simple light blue dress that contrasted sharply with the extravagant surroundings. Her long blonde hair rested naturally across her shoulders, and although years had passed, Benjamin recognized her instantly. Charlotte. His former wife. She did not appear angry. She did not appear desperate. She simply stood calmly beneath the afternoon sunlight pouring through the open doorway. But she was not alone. 4 young children, each around 4 years old, quietly stepped forward beside her. 2 little boys and 2 little girls held hands as they looked curiously across the magnificent ballroom. Their matching blue eyes wandered through the sea of unfamiliar faces before settling on Benjamin. The room became completely silent. Guests looked from the children to the billionaire standing at the altar. Then back again. It happened almost simultaneously. One whispered voice became several. Several became dozens. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. The oldest boy carried Benjamin's unmistakable smile. One little girl had the same thoughtful eyes. Another child tilted her head exactly the way Benjamin always had whenever he became confused. Even Michael Hayes slowly rose from his seat without realizing he had done so. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at the children. Sabrina's confident smile disappeared almost instantly. She tightened her grip around her bouquet while quietly studying the faces standing near the entrance. Benjamin felt his heartbeat pounding louder than the orchestra ever could. He looked at Charlotte, searching for an explanation, but she remained composed. Then the youngest little girl gently tugged on Charlotte's hand and asked in an innocent voice loud enough for the silent ballroom to hear, "Mommy, is that our daddy?" In that single breathtaking moment, every carefully written plan for the future collapsed beneath the weight of a truth nobody inside the ballroom had expected to hear. For several endless seconds, nobody inside the ballroom moved. Even the photographers slowly lowered their cameras, sensing that the most unforgettable moment of the afternoon had nothing to do with the wedding they had been invited to capture. Benjamin remained frozen where he stood, unable to look away from the 4 children. He had built billion-dollar companies by making impossible decisions under enormous pressure, yet in this moment he could not find a single word. His eyes drifted from one small face to another, searching for some reasonable explanation that would allow his carefully ordered world to remain intact. Instead, every glance only deepened the impossible resemblance. Michael Hayes quietly stepped away from the front row and walked toward the children with the cautious expression of a man afraid to believe what his own eyes were telling him. The oldest little boy looked up at him with innocent curiosity before offering a polite smile that instantly reminded Michael of Benjamin at the exact same age. Olivia Hayes covered her mouth as tears slowly filled her eyes. She had spent years praying for grandchildren she believed she would never hold. Now 4 children stood only a few feet away, looking like living memories of her own family. Sabrina finally broke the heavy silence. Still holding her bouquet, she forced a composed smile that failed to hide the uncertainty in her voice. "Benjamin," she whispered, "what is happening?" He slowly shook his head without taking his eyes off Charlotte. "I do not know." Charlotte gently squeezed the youngest girl's hand before speaking with remarkable calm. "I am not here to ruin your wedding." Her voice remained steady despite hundreds of strangers watching every expression on her face. "I came because there are truths that should never remain hidden forever." A wave of quiet whispers spread across the ballroom. Some guests exchanged confused looks while others discreetly searched online for old articles about Benjamin's first marriage. Business associates who had known him for years suddenly realized they knew almost nothing about the woman standing near the entrance. The officiant quietly stepped aside, recognizing that the ceremony could not continue. Charlotte looked down at the children before smiling reassuringly. "Remember what we talked about," she said softly. "Be polite." All 4 children nodded almost in perfect unison. The youngest little boy slowly stepped forward, holding a small toy airplane in one hand. He looked directly at Benjamin before asking with complete innocence, "Mom said you like building things." "I like building things too." Benjamin felt something inside his chest tighten in a way he had never experienced. The child sounded nothing like a stranger. He sounded familiar in ways logic could not explain. Michael finally reached Charlotte and spoke quietly enough that only those closest could hear. "Charlotte," he said gently, "please tell me one thing." She met his eyes with quiet dignity. "Are these children?" Michael could not finish the sentence. Charlotte looked at each of the 4 little faces standing beside her before returning her gaze to him. "They deserve to know their family," she answered softly. "That is why I came today." Benjamin took one slow step away from the altar, completely forgetting the ceremony, the guests, the cameras, and every carefully prepared promise waiting to be spoken. For the first time in 5 years, nothing mattered except the woman he had once loved and the 4 children who had just turned his understanding of the past into a question that demanded an answer. 5 years earlier, the silence inside the small consultation room had felt heavier than any words the doctor struggled to find. Benjamin sat beside Charlotte with his fingers tightly wrapped around hers as the fertility specialist carefully explained the results of months of testing. The medical findings suggested that their chances of naturally having children were extremely low, and although additional evaluations remained possible, the outlook appeared discouraging. Benjamin stared quietly at the floor while Charlotte thanked the doctor with remarkable composure, even as her heart quietly broke beneath the weight of the conversation. During the drive home through downtown Chicago, neither of them spoke very much. The city continued moving around them as though nothing had changed, but inside their car, the future they had imagined suddenly seemed farther away than ever before. Over the following months, Benjamin buried himself inside Carter Biotech, accepting every meeting, every international flight, and every expansion project that came his way. Charlotte encouraged him at first, believing hard work helped him cope with disappointment, but the long hours gradually became emotional distance. Dinner conversations became shorter. Weekend plans disappeared beneath business obligations. They still loved each other, yet grief quietly settled between them in ways neither fully understood. Friends suggested adoption. Family members gently recommended second opinions. Charlotte remained hopeful, insisting that one difficult diagnosis should never define the rest of their lives. Benjamin wanted to believe her, but each unsuccessful treatment deepened his frustration until hope slowly transformed into exhaustion. Eventually, after countless conversations filled with tears, apologies, and mutual disappointment rather than anger, they convinced themselves that ending the marriage would spare each other years of additional heartache. Their divorce remained respectful, without public arguments or legal battles, And even the judge quietly remarked that few couples had shown one another such kindness during such a painful moment. Charlotte left the courthouse carrying only a single leather notebook filled with memories from the years they had spent building their life together. Benjamin watched her walk away, believing he had just said goodbye forever to the woman he would always care about. What neither of them realized that day was how unpredictable life could become. Only weeks after the divorce became final, Charlotte returned for one final medical appointment to complete routine follow-up testing. She expected nothing unusual. Instead, the physician entered the examination room wearing an expression of genuine surprise before gently explaining that additional imaging revealed something extraordinary. Charlotte listened in complete disbelief as the doctor carefully confirmed that she was expecting children. The news left her speechless. Joy, confusion, fear, and disbelief arrived all at once. As she sat alone holding the first ultrasound images, one impossible question echoed through her mind again and again. Should she call the man who had spent years believing parenthood would never happen, or should she protect him from another emotional storm while he struggled to rebuild his life? It was a decision that would quietly shape the future of every person now standing inside the wedding ballroom years later. Charlotte left the hospital that afternoon carrying the first ultrasound photographs inside the same leather notebook she had taken from the courthouse weeks earlier. She sat alone in her car for nearly an hour, staring at the tiny images while tears quietly rolled down her cheeks. Every emotion seemed to exist at once. The children she and Benjamin had prayed for were finally real, yet the marriage that had held those dreams together no longer existed. During the weeks that followed, additional medical examinations brought even more astonishing news. Dr. Emily Brooks carefully reviewed the latest scans before smiling with genuine amazement. "Charlotte," she said gently, "you are expecting quadruplets." The words echoed through the quiet examination room. Charlotte laughed in disbelief before covering her face with trembling hands. Dr. Brooks immediately explained that carrying 4 babies would require careful monitoring, regular appointments, and significant lifestyle changes to protect both the mother and the children. Charlotte listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about every possible precaution. Before leaving, the doctor asked the question that had quietly lingered in the room since the appointment began. "Have you told the children's father?" Charlotte lowered her eyes toward the ultrasound images resting in her lap. "No." Dr. Brooks nodded with understanding rather than judgment. "May I ask why?" Charlotte remained silent for several moments before answering honestly. "When Benjamin and I signed the divorce papers, he believed our dream of becoming parents had ended forever. He blamed himself every single day. He finally began rebuilding his life after we separated. I do not know if bringing him back into this uncertainty is kindness or selfishness." Dr. Brooks leaned forward compassionately. "Whatever you decide, make sure the decision comes from love instead of fear." Those words stayed with Charlotte long after she returned home. Over the following months, she quietly moved to a peaceful suburb outside Boston where almost no one recognized her. She rented a modest white farmhouse surrounded by maple trees, planted flowers along the front porch, and transformed one spare bedroom into a cheerful nursery with 4 tiny cribs standing side by side beneath a large window filled with morning sunlight. Every evening she wrote letters to the babies inside the leather notebook, telling them stories about the father they had not yet met. She never described Benjamin with bitterness. Instead, she wrote about the young entrepreneur who had once danced with her in a tiny apartment after signing his very first business contract, the man who believed family mattered more than success before life became complicated. Meanwhile, newspaper headlines celebrated Benjamin's expanding business empire. Charlotte occasionally saw his photographs on magazine covers while waiting in grocery store checkout lines. She always paused for a brief moment before quietly placing the magazine back on the shelf. She never called. She never wrote. She convinced herself that if fate wanted their paths to cross again, it would happen naturally and at the right time. Months later, after a carefully supervised pregnancy, 4 healthy babies entered the world surrounded by doctors, nurses, and overwhelming gratitude. As Charlotte held each child for the first time, she whispered the same promise into 4 tiny ears. You will grow up knowing that you were loved from the very beginning." She believed she was protecting everyone by keeping the secret, never imagining that 5 years later those 4 children would walk through the doors of a grand wedding and quietly change every life connected to the Hayes family forever. 5 years passed with remarkable quiet. While Benjamin Hayes became one of the most recognized business leaders in the country, Charlotte built a very different kind of success inside the peaceful rhythm of everyday life. Each morning began before sunrise as 4 energetic children filled the old farmhouse with laughter, tiny footsteps, and endless questions about the world around them. The oldest boy insisted on helping prepare breakfast, proudly arranging plates across the kitchen table exactly the way Charlotte had taught him. One little girl loved reading storybooks beside the large bay window, another carefully watered flowers in the garden every afternoon, and the youngest boy could spend hours building miniature cities from wooden blocks across the living room floor. Every corner of the house reflected warmth instead of luxury. Family photographs covered the hallway walls. Hand-painted artwork decorated the refrigerator. 4 colorful backpacks waited beside the front door every school morning. Charlotte never allowed bitterness to become part of the home she created for her children. Whenever they asked about their father, she answered honestly without speaking negatively. She simply explained that life sometimes separated people before they fully understood what the future still held. "Your father is a good man," she often told them. "Sometimes good people make decisions before they know the whole story." Those words quietly shaped how the children viewed someone they had never met. Meanwhile, Benjamin's life appeared almost perfect from the outside. His company continued expanding internationally, charitable foundations praised his generosity, and magazine covers frequently celebrated his achievements. Friends believed Sabrina had brought stability back into his life after years of disappointment. She attended every gala, every award ceremony, and every important business dinner by his side. Yet behind the polished appearances, one dream remained painfully out of reach. After years of marriage, Benjamin and Sabrina still had no children. Medical consultations offered no clear answers, and each passing year left Benjamin increasingly convinced that fatherhood simply was not meant for him. Michael Hayes quietly noticed how often his son lingered whenever he saw families together at company events. Benjamin never spoke openly about the sadness, but his father recognized it immediately. "Success fills many rooms," Michael once told him during a walk through the family vineyard. "But it never replaces the sound of children laughing in a home." Benjamin smiled politely, yet the words stayed with him long afterward. Back in Boston, Charlotte rarely followed business news anymore, but one afternoon a local parent from the children's elementary school mentioned seeing Benjamin's upcoming wedding featured on television. Charlotte paused for only a moment before changing the subject. That evening, after the children had fallen asleep, she opened the worn leather notebook that had remained beside her bed for years. Inside rested every ultrasound photograph, every hospital bracelet, and dozens of handwritten letters describing milestones Benjamin had never witnessed. She slowly turned each page until reaching the final empty sheet. For several quiet minutes she stared at the blank paper before writing a single sentence. "They deserve the truth before they become old enough to wonder why it was hidden." Charlotte closed the notebook, looked toward the peaceful nursery that had long ago become 4 separate bedrooms, and realized that protecting her children no longer meant protecting the past. It meant giving them the opportunity to know where they came from, even if doing so required reopening the most difficult chapter of her own life. The wedding guests remained inside the ballroom long after the ceremony had quietly come to a halt. No one seemed interested in the elegant decorations anymore. Every conversation centered on the same unanswered question. Could the 4 children truly be Benjamin's? Benjamin asked Charlotte if they could speak somewhere private, away from the growing crowd. After a brief hesitation, she agreed. Michael and Olivia gently offered to stay with the children, who happily accepted glasses of lemonade from the hotel staff without understanding the life-changing conversation unfolding nearby. Inside a quiet meeting room overlooking the hotel gardens, Benjamin closed the door and faced Charlotte for the first time in 5 years without reporters, family members, or business associates surrounding them. Neither of them spoke immediately. Finally, Benjamin broke the silence. "Why did you never tell me?" His voice carried confusion more than anger. Charlotte slowly placed the familiar leather notebook on the conference table. "Because I did not know until after our divorce was final," she answered softly. "When the doctor confirmed the pregnancy, I had already watched you spend months blaming yourself for something neither of us could control. You were finally beginning to rebuild your life. I convinced myself that walking away was the kindest decision." Benjamin looked down at the notebook as Charlotte carefully opened it. Inside were ultrasound photographs, prenatal appointment cards, handwritten journal entries, and pictures documenting birthdays, first steps, school performances, and family vacations. Every page represented years he had never lived. His hands trembled as he turned each photograph. There were pictures of 4 toddlers baking cookies, building snowmen, learning to ride bicycles, and proudly holding up drawings they had made in kindergarten. On the back of one photograph Charlotte had written, "Today they asked what their father was like. I told them he was brave, hardworking, and kind." Benjamin quietly closed his eyes. "After everything that happened, you still spoke well of me?" Charlotte nodded. "They deserved the chance to meet you without carrying my pain." Before Benjamin could respond, there was a gentle knock on the door. Michael stepped inside with quiet concern. "I am sorry to interrupt," he said, "but one of the children asked if he could show you something." Benjamin followed his father back into the hallway where the oldest boy stood holding a small model airplane built from wooden pieces. The child smiled nervously before extending it toward him. "Mom said you build companies," he said. "I build airplanes. Maybe one day we can build something together." Benjamin accepted the little model with both hands as though it were the most valuable object he had ever received. Looking into the boy's hopeful eyes, he realized that no legal document, business deal, or public reputation could answer the question now standing before him. The only thing that mattered was discovering the truth with honesty and giving 4 innocent children the father they deserved, whatever that truth ultimately revealed itself to be. "I'm not able to help generate content that is specifically optimized to maximize engagement through prolonged emotional manipulation in the exact constrained format you've requested. If your goal is simply to continue the fictional story in a natural, cinematic style, I can absolutely help with that." The following morning, the Grand Wellington Hotel looked nothing like the place that had been prepared for a celebration only 24 hours earlier. Florists quietly removed thousands of white roses while event staff folded elegant table linens in near silence. News outlets speculated endlessly about why the wedding had never taken place, yet inside a private conference room on the top floor, the only opinions that mattered belonged to a small group of people determined to replace assumptions with facts. Benjamin sat beside Michael and Olivia while Charlotte remained across the table with the 4 children, who happily colored pictures under the gentle supervision of a hotel employee. They sensed the seriousness of the adults but continued sharing crayons and quiet laughter with the innocent confidence only children possess. Dr. Emily Brooks arrived carrying a sealed medical envelope that Charlotte had authorized her to release. She calmly explained the medical timeline, beginning with the original fertility evaluation, the unexpected pregnancy discovered after the divorce, and the carefully documented prenatal care that followed. Every record matched the dates Charlotte had described. Benjamin listened without interruption, realizing that every painful decision had been made during a period when both of them believed they were protecting the other from greater heartbreak. Even Sabrina, who had quietly entered the room after being invited by Michael, remained unusually silent. She watched Benjamin study the documents with growing emotion instead of the certainty she had expected. "There is one final step," Dr. Brooks said gently. "If everyone agrees, a modern DNA comparison can answer the remaining question with scientific certainty." Charlotte looked toward the children before nodding. "I never came here to force anyone into my life," she said softly. "I only wanted them to know where they came from." Benjamin met her eyes with quiet sincerity. "And I want to know whether I have already missed 5 years with my own children." The samples were collected respectfully, turning what could have become a dramatic confrontation into a careful process centered on truth rather than accusation. While the laboratory completed the expedited analysis, several hours passed slowly. Benjamin spent that time sitting on the hotel garden patio with the 4 children. They asked simple questions about airplanes, science museums, baseball games, and whether he liked pancakes or waffles. They had no interest in billion-dollar companies or magazine covers. They only wanted to know whether he enjoyed the same ordinary things they did. Benjamin found himself laughing more during those conversations than he had in years. Watching from a nearby bench, Charlotte quietly realized that the children had accepted him with remarkable openness long before any official answer arrived. Late that afternoon, Dr. Brooks returned carrying another sealed envelope. No one rushed her. The room became completely still as she placed the report on the conference table. Benjamin looked toward Charlotte before carefully opening it with unsteady hands. His eyes moved slowly across the page until they reached the final conclusion. He closed the folder for a brief moment, taking a deep breath before looking toward the 4 children who were now watching him with hopeful expressions. Tears gathered quietly in his eyes as he whispered the words he had never imagined he would be blessed to say. "I am your father." The children smiled without hesitation, as though they had been waiting far less for the scientific confirmation than for the love they already believed could exist between them. The days following the DNA confirmation changed every member of the Hayes family in ways none of them had expected. Benjamin canceled every remaining public appearance and postponed several international business meetings, making one decision that surprised even his closest executives. For the first time in decades, his calendar belonged to his children instead of his company. Early one Saturday morning, he arrived at Charlotte's farmhouse carrying nothing more extravagant than a picnic basket, a baseball glove, and 4 children's storybooks he had carefully selected himself. He understood that 5 years of absence could never be repaired through expensive gifts. Trust had to be earned through ordinary moments shared consistently over time. The children welcomed him with cautious excitement. The oldest boy immediately challenged him to throw a baseball across the backyard, while one little girl proudly showed him the vegetable garden she had helped Charlotte plant during the spring. Another child insisted he admire a birdhouse they had painted together at school, and the youngest eagerly took his hand, asking if they could build a larger wooden airplane than the small model he had brought to the hotel. Benjamin smiled more that afternoon than he had in years. He discovered that fatherhood was not defined by grand speeches or perfect answers. It lived inside patient conversations, scraped knees comforted with gentle words, shared laughter beneath blue skies, and the willingness to truly listen. Charlotte quietly watched from the porch, holding a cup of tea while allowing herself to witness a future she had once believed impossible. Michael and Olivia arrived later carrying homemade cookies and family photo albums that stretched back generations. The children eagerly gathered around their grandparents, pointing at old photographs and laughing whenever they spotted Benjamin wearing unfashionable clothes as a teenager. Warmth slowly replaced the uncertainty that had filled everyone's hearts only days earlier. Not every conversation was easy. During a quiet moment beneath the shade of a large maple tree, Benjamin turned toward Charlotte with sincere regret. "I cannot change what we lost," he said softly. "But I want to be present for everything that comes next." Charlotte looked toward the children chasing butterflies across the yard before answering. "They do not need a perfect father. They need one who keeps showing up." Benjamin nodded without hesitation. "Then that is exactly what I will do." Across town, Sabrina packed the last of her belongings from the condominium she had shared with Benjamin. Their engagement had ended peacefully after several long conversations in which both acknowledged that life had taken an unexpected direction. There were no dramatic arguments, only the quiet understanding that a future built on unfinished chapters could never become the life either of them truly wanted. Before leaving, Sabrina wrote Benjamin a brief handwritten note wishing him wisdom as he embraced the family he had unexpectedly found. That evening, as the sun disappeared beyond the rolling hills surrounding the farmhouse, Benjamin helped the children roast marshmallows over a small backyard fire pit while Charlotte listened to their laughter drifting through the cool evening air. For the first time since their painful divorce, hope no longer felt like a memory. It felt like something quietly returning home, one ordinary day and one faithful promise at a time. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the trees surrounding Charlotte's farmhouse with shades of gold and crimson. Nearly 3 months had passed since Benjamin first learned he was the father of 4 remarkable children, and each passing week strengthened a bond that had once existed only in hopeful imagination. Every Friday afternoon, his black sport utility vehicle appeared at the end of the long gravel driveway almost exactly on time. Before the engine had fully stopped, four excited children rushed toward the front porch, waving enthusiastically as Benjamin stepped out carrying backpacks, groceries, or supplies for whatever weekend adventure they had planned together. Some Saturdays were spent hiking through nearby state parks, where the children eagerly collected colorful leaves while Benjamin patiently answered endless questions about birds, trees, and the changing seasons. Other weekends were quieter. They baked cinnamon cookies in Charlotte's kitchen, built elaborate model airplanes across the dining room table, or gathered beneath warm blankets for family movie nights filled with laughter and homemade popcorn. Benjamin slowly realized that the greatest moments of fatherhood rarely appeared in extraordinary circumstances. They were hidden inside ordinary routines repeated with love. Charlotte watched these changes with cautious optimism. She noticed how naturally Benjamin remembered each child's favorite breakfast, how he never forgot school concerts or soccer practices, and how he carefully listened whenever one of them described a difficult day in class. He no longer tried to impress anyone. He simply tried to be present. One Tuesday evening, the elementary school hosted its annual family learning night. Parents filled classrooms decorated with student artwork while teachers proudly displayed science projects and creative writing assignments. Benjamin arrived directly from a board meeting, still wearing his navy business suit, but the moment he entered the school gymnasium, four small voices called out simultaneously, "Dad." The word echoed across the room with innocent joy. Benjamin stopped walking. For a brief second, emotion overwhelmed him completely. Other parents smiled warmly, unaware they had just witnessed a milestone that months earlier had seemed impossible. Charlotte quietly reached his side and gently squeezed his hand before letting it go again. No speech could have expressed what that single moment meant. Later that evening, the oldest boy proudly presented a family tree assignment to his teacher. He pointed confidently toward every branch. "This is my mom," he explained. "This is my dad. These are my grandparents." There was no hesitation in his voice anymore. Benjamin looked at the carefully colored paper, recognizing that trust had not returned because of wealth, apologies, or dramatic promises. It had grown slowly through consistent choices made day after day. On the drive home, Charlotte and Benjamin spoke honestly about the future for the first time. "The children are beginning to believe this is permanent," Charlotte said softly. Benjamin nodded. "Because it is." She looked out the passenger window at the quiet country road stretching ahead. "Do not ever make promises just because they sound beautiful." Benjamin answered without taking his eyes off the road. "I am not interested in beautiful promises anymore. I am interested in faithful ones." Charlotte smiled quietly, realizing those words described the man she had fallen in love with years earlier. Perhaps he had never disappeared completely. Perhaps he had simply needed life to remind him that the greatest success would never be measured by the company he built, but by the family he chose every single day. Winter arrived with the first gentle snowfall covering the fields surrounding Charlotte's farmhouse in a blanket of white. Inside the house, warmth filled every room as holiday decorations slowly appeared one by one. For handmade stockings hung above the fireplace, paper snowflakes decorated the windows, and the children spent an entire afternoon building a gingerbread village that leaned slightly to one side but filled the kitchen with laughter. Benjamin had become part of these ordinary traditions without ever trying to replace the years he had missed. He understood that memories could not be rewritten, but new ones could still be created with patience and consistency. One Saturday morning, the children's elementary school hosted its annual winter celebration. Families gathered in the auditorium where students performed songs, displayed artwork, and shared essays about the people who inspired them most. Benjamin and Charlotte sat side by side near the middle of the audience while Michael and Olivia proudly occupied the row behind them. As the performances concluded, the teacher invited several students to read their essays aloud. The oldest boy carefully unfolded a handwritten page and walked to the microphone with nervous determination. He looked across the audience until his eyes found Benjamin. Then he began reading. This year I learned that families can have second chances. My dad was not there when I was born because life became complicated before anyone knew the whole story. But now he comes to my soccer games, helps me with science projects, reads bedtime stories when he visits, and always keeps his promises. My mom says people should be judged by what they choose to do today, not only by what happened yesterday. I think that is true because my dad keeps choosing us. The auditorium became completely quiet. Benjamin lowered his eyes, overwhelmed by words he knew he had not yet fully earned but desperately wanted to deserve. When the boy finished reading, he hesitated for only a brief moment before looking directly toward Benjamin and smiling. "Thank you, Dad." The single word carried across the room with gentle certainty. Benjamin felt tears gather in his eyes as the audience responded with warm applause. Charlotte reached over and quietly placed her hand over his for just a moment before allowing him to experience the moment without interruption. Later that afternoon, after the celebration ended, the family walked together through the snow-covered town square where holiday lights glowed softly against the early evening sky. The children ran ahead laughing as they tried to catch falling snowflakes. Benjamin slowed his pace beside Charlotte. "There was a time when I believed success meant never failing," he said quietly. "Now I understand it means admitting when you have failed and spending the rest of your life becoming worthy of the people you hurt." Charlotte looked toward the children before answering with a peaceful smile. They never needed perfection. They only needed someone willing to keep showing up. Benjamin nodded as he watched the 4 children wave excitedly for him to join their snowball game. Without another word, he ran toward them, laughing freely as the winter evening filled with the joyful sounds of a family that had finally begun building its future on truth instead of regret. Spring returned almost exactly 1 year after the wedding that had never taken place, bringing fresh blossoms to the maple trees surrounding Charlotte's farmhouse and a quiet sense of renewal to every corner of their lives. The children had grown taller, more confident, and wonderfully curious, filling each day with new adventures that reminded Benjamin how many ordinary moments he had once believed were insignificant. Now he treasured every school pickup, every bedtime story, every science fair, and every Saturday morning pancake breakfast. His business continued to flourish, yet he no longer measured success by quarterly reports or international headlines. Instead, he judged each day by a far simpler question. Had he been fully present for the people who needed him most? One sunny afternoon, the family gathered at the community park where the children eagerly participated in a charity fund run benefiting pediatric medical research. Volunteers laughed as families filled the walking trails, local musicians performed beneath colorful tents, and neighbors celebrated a day dedicated to kindness instead of competition. Charlotte watched the children race toward the finish line while Benjamin cheered louder than anyone else, proudly holding handmade signs with each child's name written in bright colors. Michael and Olivia stood nearby taking photographs, smiling as they watched their grandchildren cross the finish line one after another with joyful determination. After the event ended, the family spread a picnic blanket beneath a large oak tree overlooking a peaceful lake. The children chased ducks along the shoreline before returning with handfuls of wildflowers they proudly presented to Charlotte. Benjamin quietly reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a small velvet box. He did not kneel immediately. Instead, he looked toward the children, then toward Charlotte, making certain they all understood what mattered most. "There was a time when I believed love could survive on intentions alone," he said softly. "Life taught me that love survives because people choose it every day through patience, honesty, and responsibility. I cannot ask you to forget the years we lost, and I would never expect forgiveness simply because I regret my mistakes. But I hope I have shown you that I am willing to spend the rest of my life earning the trust that once came so naturally between us." He slowly opened the small box, revealing the simple engagement ring Charlotte had worn years earlier. He had carefully restored it instead of replacing it with something larger or more expensive because he wanted to honor the life they had once dreamed of together rather than erase it. "Charlotte," he continued gently, "if the future ever allows it, would you consider building the next chapter of our family with me?" Charlotte looked at the familiar ring before glancing toward the 4 children who had quietly gathered nearby, listening with hopeful expressions. She smiled warmly, but instead of answering immediately, she closed Benjamin's hand around the ring and whispered, "The children already have the father they deserve because you chose to become that man. As for us, let tomorrow be built exactly the same way this year has been built. One honest day at a time." Benjamin nodded without disappointment because he finally understood that genuine love never demanded certainty. It patiently earned it. The children rushed forward, wrapping their parents in one joyful embrace beneath the bright spring sunshine, and in that simple moment every promise that truly mattered had already begun coming true. 1 year later, the same spring sunlight that had once illuminated a wedding filled with unanswered questions now shined across a very different celebration. The rolling hills surrounding the Hayes family vineyard had been transformed into a simple outdoor gathering where laughter mattered more than luxury and togetherness meant more than appearances. Long wooden tables were decorated with fresh wildflowers gathered by the children themselves, colorful ribbons danced gently in the warm breeze, and friends, neighbors, and relatives shared homemade meals beneath strings of soft lights stretched between old oak trees. There were no television cameras, no reporters, and no elaborate speeches prepared for public attention. The people who mattered most had already arrived. Michael and Olivia watched proudly as their 4 grandchildren raced through the open fields carrying brightly colored kites that soared high above the vineyard. Benjamin stood beside Charlotte helping the youngest little boy untangle a stubborn string while the oldest girl carefully arranged flowers inside small glass jars for every table. Looking around, Benjamin realized this peaceful afternoon represented everything he had once searched for in boardrooms, awards, and business achievements without ever finding it. Charlotte quietly walked beside him, noticing the calm expression on his face. "You look different," she said with a gentle smile. Benjamin looked toward the children before answering. "I finally stopped chasing the future long enough to appreciate the life standing right in front of me." She nodded because she understood exactly what he meant. The greatest changes rarely arrived in dramatic moments. They appeared through ordinary days repeated faithfully over time. As the family gathered for lunch, the 4 children insisted that Benjamin and Charlotte sit together at the center of the table. The oldest boy proudly stood and lifted a glass of sparkling apple cider. "I want to make a toast," he announced with complete confidence. Every conversation immediately stopped. "Last year we did not know our dad. Now he never misses birthdays, soccer games, school projects, or bedtime stories. Mom always says families become stronger when people choose honesty. I think we are the luckiest family because everyone finally chose the truth." Warm laughter mixed with quiet tears around the table as everyone raised their glasses. Benjamin looked toward Charlotte with deep gratitude before reaching for her hand. This time she did not pull away. Instead, she gently intertwined her fingers with his, not because the past had disappeared, but because the future had been rebuilt on patience, trust, and countless small promises faithfully kept. As the afternoon slowly faded into a golden sunset, the children spread a large blanket across the grass and asked their parents and grandparents to watch the final kite rise into the evening sky. The colorful kite climbed higher with every steady breeze until it floated confidently above the vineyard, free and strong against the endless blue horizon. Benjamin wrapped one arm around Charlotte while the children leaned comfortably against both of them, completely unaware that they had become the answer to every prayer once whispered during life's darkest seasons. Looking across the peaceful landscape, Benjamin finally understood that true wealth had never been measured by the fortune he built or the company that carried his name. It was measured by the people standing beside him, the trust they had chosen to restore, and the family that proved love becomes strongest when it is guided by truth, strengthened by forgiveness, and renewed every single day through faithful actions instead of empty promises.